OptiApp is an automated NIS2 Cyber Fundamentals compliance auditor. What it means is that it's configured to measure NIS2 maturity level of an organization, both from a technical and from a documentation and governance perspective. The way this has been configured is to extract the data out of a customer's organization, analyze it, propose improvement ideas, and then look at the documentation to see whether it reflects reality and whether anything else needs to be improved upon it. At the same time, if documentation is lacking, the tool comes with the ability to create such documentation so that it actually adheres to the NIS2 framework. Now, let's do a quick overview of how it's supposed to be working. So this is thought of as a SaaS platform to begin with, but it can be deployed on a tenant basis. The fragrance that we're going to be talking about today is the actual SaaS tool. So the first thing that we're going to see is the actual dashboard where most of the data is actually compiled. It gives you a brief overview of where the organization stands in terms of compliance, by function, by controls, and it gives you an overall maturity score, like I was saying earlier, both from a technical perspective and from documentation and implementation. Now, moving on, because we're going to circle back to this in a bit, we've got the connections page, which is basically in a starting point. So we're going to be adding more connection capabilities as we develop the app further. So for instance, we're in the pipeline, we've got the DNA Center, the security cloud controls, or on-premise Active Directory. But for today's instance, we're going to be focusing on the Microsoft Graph, which is actually a way that the tool talks to the M365 tenancy. For the demo that we're going to be holding, we're actually going to be talking about our own tenancy, which a mock-up tenancy, which we're going to scan using the tool. So it needs a tenant ID, and in order to point it at, and at the same time, it needs an application consent, which is quite easy to do. You just copy the link, you give it to the organization manager, who's got a global administrator within the M365 tenancy. They put it within their browser, click approve, and that's it, you're good to go. So for this one, I've already populated the tenant ID, the application's already been created. So if I'm going to click test connection, or what I'm getting now is the actual tenant ID and confirmation that it's able to connect just fine. Now, after I've connected, the first thing you can do is actually scan that tenancy from a technical perspective. When you hit the start audits, you've got all of these collectors that are going to be pulling data out of the tenancy. For this particular exercise, I already did that, so we don't actually have to wait for them to complete. But usually a scan takes somewhere around 1-2 minutes if we're talking M365. If we want to add some more complexities to it, like we've seen on the other connections, is going to be a bit more. Now, after the scans ran, you can go on to the results page, which is basically going to show you the controls that it actually tried to validate. And it's going to show you whether you're compliant, whether you're not, what the impact would be if you're not compliant, and pretty much a brief overview of how your organization looks like from a NIS2 technical perspective. Now, for history, you've got the ability to record history of the scan. Basically, you can run the scan a few times, and then you've got the ability to compare how the organization looked like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago before we actually implemented the controls, and how it looks today when you scan it again. And you've got the ability to actually compare those two scans, which we're going to be looking at to do in a bit. So I'll just move on, and we're still going to circle back to this in a minute or so. Now, back to the next tab. when those scans are completed, the data is actually pulled together and sent to our own AI system, which has been trained utilizing RAG with and NIS2 developed internal documents, which basically tells it what our idea of good looks like in an organization. Now, when the AI receives the data out of those scans, it actually tries to look at that from a technical perspective, and then it tries to map it against the NIS2 measures and articles. What comes out of it is pretty much this whole bunch of text, which, if you look at it, it does make sense, but it's a bit hard to follow, if I'm honest. So to that extent, we've actually created another report that's a bit more user-friendly, let's say, which contains all of this data, but gives you the ability to do some proper tracking and to do some scoring against the organization. So if I'm going to be clicking this, it downloads a file, which is the report we're going to be looking at, and this is how it actually presents itself. As you can see, we've got a quite low maturity score. Again, this is for demo and testing purposes, so most likely in a live state, the score is going to differ. It's going to be, I don't know, maybe greener, maybe redder, I don't know, depends on what controls you've got implemented within there. What this does, it gives you a high overview of the NIS2 articles, where you are in terms of those. It only analyzes them from a technical perspective, again, so it doesn't look for any documentation, and it gives you a score as to where you need to improve. Now, if I want to see the articles that where Microsoft Entra, for instance, is mentioned, I got the ability to filter just for these. If I just want to look at Defender, again, it's got filtering. If I want to look at Intune, again, the filtering works across all of the pages. Now, the same thing is valid if we're looking for the detailed analysis. The detailed analysis page is actually a reflection of where you are in terms of a certain area within NIS2. So let's say we want to look at risk analysis and security policies. Here you've got all of the controls that you've that have been scanned earlier on. It gives you a brief understanding of those. It does a gap analysis to see what is it that you're actually missing within each of the sections. So, for instance, here it says the SharePoint requires risk-based controls, evidence that SharePoint sites are actually being monitored, how many of those are inactive, and so on. Then you're looking at the exchange policies, whether you've got alert trigger for, I don't know, spike and sending emails or something like that, and whether you've got some formal control about periodic reviews or risk assessments. Again, it analyzes all of this. It creates recommendations as to what you need to do within the estate in order to get it back on track and make it compliant. It tells you exactly where you need to implement it, against what article. It gives you the severity or priority for all of this to be implemented, and so on. And again, it also references the articles within the cyber fundamentals and NIS2 frameworks. Now, on top of this, you've got it again. You've got it for all of the sections that we talked about earlier. So basically, it's a measure that covers pretty much the whole technical perspective. But to make things a bit easier to follow from a project manager's perspective, let's say that you're in point A and you want to get to point B where everything's nice and dandy and it's compliant and it shows all green, it actually gives you a roadmap of implementation based on efforts and quick wins. So for instance, if I want to go on to phase one, which is implementable within the next 30 days based on criticality and effort. This one actually says that you need to create conditional access policies in order to block legacy authentication, enable compliant devices to log on, and so on. Now, basically, this gives you what you need to implement. and it gives you a nice time frame as to how you believe you need to do it. Again, you've got one for reduce global administrative footprint, which the suggestion here is to move users to PIM rather than have permanent global admins and so on. So pretty much it takes into account all of the controls that it tries to validate, and it segregates them by importance and efforts to have them implemented. Now, it also gives you a quick win pane of glass. This one's not actually, let's say, detailed because you already find them within here, but they're nominated to say, yeah, this is what you need to do. You can go figure it out from here. It also does a risk-based assessment on the controls that it found. It gives you the total risk score that you've got, how many of the controls are in critical state, so you can actually go and visit them, and says create new, excluded from conditional access. So this is pretty much so you don't actually get locked out of your own tenancy. Now, at the same time, if you're reporting to a board or to CISO, IT director, so on, this actually creates a nice overview, an executive summary you can go and present. It gives you an overall picture as to where you are in terms of overall compliance, what the status is in accordance to the articles, and risks and so on. So it's pretty much tells the story of all of the scans that took place and what you need to do and what the impact of those actions and decisions would be. The last tab is actually all of the controls that have been validated. You can, let's say, if you've got multiple teams working on this, you can segregate them for NIS2 articles, sources. Let's say if you want to look at the Intune's one only and pass them on to whoever manages the Intune, and you can do another filtering, for instance, on, let's say you want to see the high ones. So that's it. Everything gives you an idea as to where you need to start and what you need to do in order to have all of this completed. So this one gets generated with every AI analysis that you do, and is going to change. Again, you can do a progress tracking of it as you move along from a technical perspective. Done with the technical perspective per se, as in the actual controls, we're going to move on to the very exciting world of documentation. As I was mentioning at the start of the conversation, this application has two fragrances. One's to do with the actual technical analysis and technical discovery, and the other is to do with the documentation of the documentation mapping against the NIS2 articles. So what this does is basically a way to show that you've got the proper documentation in case of an NIS2 article, and that they're mapped against the cyber fundamentals essentials, for instance, like we've got here, to show that you've got a level of maturity within the organization. So if I'm going to click on one of these, it opens up a pretty much new window, which gives you an understanding as to what the article says, what you need to do against it, how it's actually being measured, what the target maturity. So for instance, on this one, we want to have 3, but you can say that the target maturity needs to be, I don't know, 5 from a scale of 1 to 5. And then it gives you the option to upload the document. You can click on upload. It's gonna put it next to this evidence control. And then the thing that makes this a bit more interesting is the fact that using the RAG system that we've got implemented against our AI system, we actually score those documents to see whether they're fit for purpose or compliant from an NIS2 auditing perspective. And it looks something similar to this, the outcome. Our AI reads the document, it understands it, it confirms whether it's fit for purpose, it analyzes to see if there's any gap or any documentation that we need to do. And then this is the recommendation that it pulls out of it. And it also gives you the NIS2 references that it's actually scored this against. Now, if I had this document uploaded earlier, but let's try and score one with AI now to see how things look like. So this is, it's going to evaluate both of the documents against this control and say, yeah, this is how things look like. We're going to give it a minute or so for it to finish. And afterwards, we're going to take another quick look at it to fully understand how that works. It normally takes like, I don't know, a minute or two, but depending on how rich the document is or how complex, it might take more. Holding on just for a second. Okay, so as you can see, it adapted, it gives you the confidence, it changed the rationale for everything, it adapted to the gaps. It also looks at the cryptography policy that got added earlier on. And then it pretty much did the whole thing again, taking into account that it had a new document uploaded. Now, this is actually a bit of a manual effort because you need to go and do this across all of these. And maybe it's a bit tedious to do. Plus, you've got this segregated by directions within this. So you've got govern, identity, protect, detect, respond, recover, and so on. So it's like 210 controls. You'd need to upload at least 210 documents, and some of them might actually be duplicates that would need to be uploaded to different controls and so on. So to help organizations work against this, we've developed another way of doing this. One's to allow you to upload documents in bulk. Hold on. So this is, for instance, to allow you to upload documents from Confluence. Okay, so basically, the app connected to the workspace called client Arctic Stream. So it allows you to import the documents that are located within. And what happens when you do the import? It looks quite similar to this thing over here. You just have a bunch of documents. You don't know where, to what control they're supposed to be uploaded against. So you just do something like a bulk upload. Let's say I'm going to pick one now. Let's say I'm going to use this one again. Okay. So I don't know where I need to put that in. There you go. So it uploaded it, and then it figured out these are the controls it needs to be mapped. It needs to be mapped against. So you've got them, like we were looking earlier on the Cyfun controls. All of this are mapping against that document that I've just uploaded. So it helps you figure out where you need to put it, and then you can go and score against it. Okay, if you don't have the documents at all, we also came up with the idea of helping you create those documents. So let's say you don't have a document for cybersecurity roles and responsibilities. You go and use the template, you put a organization name, the owner. I'm just going to go and do CISO here for the sake of it, IT manager, let's say, SOC, how often you want it reviewed, and then you put the security team operating model, and I don't know, it's a small organization. I'm going to leave it to this, and then you do generate and attach. And as you can see, it created a new document, and it already attached it to the control that we require this to be attached to. So if I'm going to download this, unfortunately, just came off as a document. It's not been opened within the browser. Let me just stop sharing just for a second. Okay. So this is basically what it created. Again, this is a very quick sample document. So this will be enriched based on the findings from the technical perspective, and on top of that, we also got enrichment that is based on other documents that you've got uploaded. Now, going back to the application, there's also means of tracking the progress that you're making. We were talking earlier about that project management aspect. This is where, let's say, you've got progress tracking. Again, based on documentation, based on the actions that you take, and it also gives you a nice timeline over the last 90 days. So you actually know what's actually going on within your estate, and it gives you tracking by function as well. So you know how many documents you've uploaded for each function, and how many of the evidence that you require have actually been covered by those. It also does an analysis based on the documentation that's been uploaded, and highlights the biggest gaps that you've got. And pretty much tells you a very detailed explanation as to the actions that have taken place most recently. Going back to the report page, you've got the interactive HTML dashboard, which we've seen earlier on. So it's pretty much this one. And then you've got the option of exporting all of the stuff into NIS2 as an Excel file that people can ingest into other platforms, I guess. And the other bit is a self-assessment cyber fundamentals workbook, which evaluates all of the stuff that we've done, but fills them into an Excel file. So you've got a report you can work on a daily basis. Settings is pretty much minimum from an admin perspective at this point in time. It gives you the organization name. So whenever you generate new files, all of this have a template. You can actually decide how what your target compliance rate would be, how the reports you've got want to look like, how many collectives you want to run in parallel, and so on. So these are all stuff that belong either on the documentation side of things or on the technical scanning. Now, I'm going to circle back to the audit scan and do another one, just because I mentioned earlier that there's a possibility to compare those scans, because it's already been run like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago. I don't believe there's going to be too much of a difference, but I just wanted to show you that how the tool operates and that the functionality exists. We're just going to give it another second for it's complete. Okay. Now we're going to go to the scan history page. We're going to select these two and do a comparison. And as you can see, it does a differential in between those, but because they've been run in a very small time frame, they didn't actually find anything. But if there was something, it would have highlighted in here that there is some new findings, and if some of the previous findings have disappeared, it would have marked them as resolved. Or if there was any severity changes in between those, because some of them have actually been addressed in some way or fashion, but not fully resolved, they would have been marked in here as well. So pretty much that's the gist of it. And a very quick summary. We welcome any feedback. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for your time.